doing here, Terry?
Well, as you can see, I'm sitting here by myself, getting some quiet time. Thanks for the interruption.
Sorry.
Now, I came out here to get some quiet time before my presentation, to get my mind into gear. But in answer to your question, seriously, I'm here to present the findings of my recent research that I've been conducting on my work. And to give you a bit of background, I studied for my doctoral thesis, my PhD at Bangalore University, 10 years ago. And at that time, our director of postgraduate studies was Dr. Bettina Schmidt, an anthropologist. And during the course of conducting my research, I had to come here, down to Lampeter University, where the archive of the Sir Alister Hardy Trust is housed. So part of my research was conducted here in the library. And now, 10 years later, Dr. Schmidt is now Professor Schmidt, and she has been assigned as the director of the archive at Lampeter. So it's lovely to see her again. And I feel as if I've gone full circle where my research began as a postgraduate student up at Bangalore. And now, 10 years later, I've got research findings that I've been invited to present here this afternoon. So you'll be invited to see my presentation, to explain what my research is all about. And quite coincidentally, while I was sitting here by myself, I received a message right now on a case that we worked on recently, over the weekend actually. We had a training session where we were teaching new trainees how to conduct the work that we do. And this is the feedback I've just got from one of the participants. She says, "Dear Dr. Palmer, I hope all is well with you. I'd like to share some feedback with you on the gentleman that I brought in to be cleared at the weekend. His case was worked on by Dave, one of our practitioners, with his spirit guide named Bigaro. And this is the feedback she gives. She says, he rang his estranged wife yesterday and asked her if I had done any magic on him. His words in brackets. He feels very different and he feels great today. He knew he was getting helped with magic." So that's the feedback from work we did over the weekend using our method on a gentleman in Turkey who's estranged from his wife because of his bad behaviour and his drinking habits. And this is the feedback. So, and this is what my research is all about here at Lampeter at the Alister Hardy Trust. Does that answer your question for you?
Yeah, perfect. Brilliant.
Thank you for asking.
One inevitability of life. We all know that. Anyway, so thank you for coming. I've got a very formal introduction here, but it seems like it's going to be a very informal panel. So the idea of the panel is basically that in research, dialogue is paramount, especially in anthropology. And the dialogue basically ends up staying in people's notes or on their voice recorder. It doesn't actually make it into the academic publications. And that means that the researcher can put over their own ethic analysis over what's been researched. And the idea of a dialogic approach is to actually include the original dialogue in the writing process, so that the reader can actually further analyze what's been said and come to their own ethic theorizations and conclusions on the ethnography. That's one side of it. To actually get to the stage where you can actively converse with, in my case, deities as channeled through their spirit mediums, participation in ritual events, in your case, participation in actual practice is essential, because unless you actually participate, you won't be accepted into the community you're researching. And so it's very much about not just accepting other people's third-party experiences without experiencing yourself, and/or including dialogue and analyzing dialogue and recreating dialogue so other people can continue from where you left off. So there's only two of us speaking. I'm going second. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Terence Palmer. He's an independent researcher, psychologist, working, I believe, in Kent, in the UK. He has a degree in psychology from Canterbury Christ Church University, a master's degree in the study of mysticism and religious experience from the University of Kent, and his doctorate from the University of Wales, Bangor. He's a member of numerous associations, has a diploma in medical hypnosis from the London College of Clinical Hypnosis, and has been trained in adjunctive hypnotherapy, which I want to learn about, by the Royal Society of Medicine. As well as being a hypnotherapist, he's also lectured at Bangor University in the religious studies in the psychology of religion. And his book, The Science of Spirit Possession, has been acclaimed academically and publicly. So I'd like to welcome him to the podium.
Thank you, Fabian. Thank you, Fabian, for that introduction, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this conference, in this panel. And I thank you for attending to listen to what I have to say. For me, this brings me full circle, because 10 years ago, I was at Bangor studying, researching for my thesis, when Bettina was Director of Postgraduate Research. So it's nice to come back to Lampeter and see her in the position that she's in as Professor and Director of the archive. And of course, while I was researching at Bangor, I used to have to come down here and access, because in those days you couldn't do it online, you had to get your hands on the keys. So I spent many happy days sitting in the library accessing the database. And of course now it's done online. So that's my, my background. But as Fabian said, I'm a psychologist. Not an anthropologist, and my research is hands-on. I'm a practicing clinical psychologist, and on a daily basis I treat people who come to me for help because either themselves or a family member feel that they may be being influenced by discarnate spirit entities. So I'm just going to introduce you to my method of data collection and how we arrive at the essential objective, as Fabian suggested, is in the dialogue. Dialogue between spirits and mediums and so on. So let me introduce you to the remote spirit release database. What I do is remote spirit release. I don't see clients or patients face to face. It's all done beyond time and space through mediumship. 50% of our clients are in the continent of North America. So my research objectives. I'm just going to refer to my notes. There's a difference between what is a veridical, that is originating from a verified external source, that which originates in the subliminal, the unconscious, and what is created in the imagination. Putting it simply, is there a difference between an hallucination, which is imagined or self-created, or a voice that's coming from an external source? This is the primary question, okay? Is it important to know the difference? Well, in the treatment of psychosis, it certainly is. Because if a person is presenting to the medical profession with symptoms of auditory hallucinations, then they're being treated with a mental illness and given antipsychotic drugs. But But if that diagnosis is wrong, and the voices are actually coming from a discarnate entity, in other words, if that person's possessed, then the drugs are just going to make things a lot worse. That's the basic question. Can you tell the difference? I'm going to go through a few essential points regarding the research objectives and the experimental hypotheses. First, is there a difference between an auditory hallucination and a voice from an external source? First question. How can you tell the difference between a dissociated subpersonality and a possessing spirit? This is one of the very first questions I asked when I was presented with cases that challenged traditional mainstream treatment methods. What is the influence of discarnate spirits on mental health? That's a big question. Can spiritual mediums be instrumental in the healing process, which is what Emily was talking about earlier with her research into spiritist practices? Now, we're not using spiritist practices, we're using secular, non-religious language in accessing these patients remotely by telepathy, not face-to-face, and not in groups. So can we communicate with discarnate entities through mediums? Can we communicate with patients with telepathic methods? So if you've got a patient in North America, can we communicate with that person without having to go there and see them face to face? These are the research objectives and experimental hypotheses, but the primary question is, do these methods actually work? Or is this all just figments of my imagination? Last week, I accessed our own records, our own database, and came up with 375 cases that have been recorded by me in the last 18 months, people coming and asking for help. And online, I accessed the Alistair Hardy archive with key search criteria to determine how many cases out of the total archive of more than 6,000 reports, how many had responded to the search criterion demon possession, spirit possession, demonic possession. Can you see those results on the board without me reading them out? You'll see that devil was reported 60 times. Hearing voices 18 times. Negative experience 7. Exorcism 13. Now, when I went to study for my master's degree at Kent University on the study of mysticism, our senior lecturer, Peter Moore, said to us, and this is what led me down this pathway, really. He said, when most people study mystical experiences, they're looking at the positive mystical experience. This is the primary focus of scholars studying these phenomena. He said, but what I want someone to volunteer to look at the negative side of mystical experience. And that's what led me down this pathway, really. So using negative reports in the archive, we find that, yeah, the vast majority of people are recording positive experiences, and in comparison, very, very few are negative. Now, in comparison, let's look at our data collection methods. The cases that we're looking at are not voluntary cases in response to a question, have you ever had a mystical, spiritual or religious experience? Our database comprises of cases where people are suffering badly and they need help. So they're all negative. So what we do is to enter the baseline data into a database, SPSS or PSPP. And for those of you who are analytical researchers will understand what I'm talking about. Then we record the intervention with audio-visual recording devices, and I use belt and braces. When I'm working on a case, I have an audio recorder recording the dialogue, and I'm also recording on Skype the visual, audio-visual interaction with the case. When the case is dealt with, we enter the findings into the database for statistical reporting and descriptive statistics. So we've got before and after data, which can reveal the demographic data. And certain trends and hypotheses with a large enough database can be tested. At the moment we have 375 recorded cases, and that's increasing at a rate of, on average, 1 a day. Over the weekend I had 8 new cases come in. 3 I dealt with yesterday, 2 we did today. So it's a constant flow of people asking for help. But this is the real crux, this is the real objective of the exercise, to record the data and study it and analyse the dialogue that's taking place. And this is the real meat of the exercise. Demographic data, of the 372 cases, 372, isn't it? 161 in the UK, 139 in North America. You can see Europe, Australasia, Asia, South America, Africa. So the majority are in UK, North America, with some in Europe. Now, what I find important is the client-patient relationship. To us, the client is the person who's asked for the referral. The patient is the one who needs the help. So what is the relationship between the two? And this tells us that 52% were self-referrals. I need help. 32% a family member needs help. Nearly 10% a friend, 3.76% a therapist, and that item, residence property, is not to help the individual, is to check a residence that is suspected of being haunted or being influenced by a poltergeist activity. So that gives an indication of the type of referral that we're getting. And in the dialogue that we have, investigation into the dialogue, into the nature of the illness through spirit guides and mediums, gives an insight into whether what the person is experiencing is self-created or is discarnate influence. So I find that particular variable an interesting one. Other demographic variables that we record are the place of residence. That could be with the family or independent. People who are isolated and living alone tend to be more vulnerable than people who live with a family network support. The gender, age band, ethnic origin, the religion they practice. Is there a medical diagnosis? The problem keyword. So that gives us our demographic variables. When we've conducted the procedure, the first, and I'm not going into detail about the procedure itself, that's too long a subject to go into here, but very briefly, the first thing we want to know is this person being affected by a discarnate spirit entity. Is this person sovereign? We use the term sovereignty. If a person is sovereign, it means that they are the legitimate spirit that occupies that physical body. If they're not sovereign, they're being impacted upon by another spirit. Are they sovereign, yes or no? If no, what are they being affected by? And we just grade them simply, for simplicity, for for data analysis. A minor DFE, a gargoyle type, low power, if you like. A severe DFE is what would be termed in religious language a devil or a demon, okay? And medium, somewhere in between. So sovereign, those cases that are presented to us, 25% were sovereign, had no spirit influence.
Can I just ask a quick question? What's DFE again?
Dark force entity.
Dark force?
Dark force entity.
Right, okay.
A negative spirit. We use that term, it's a secular term rather than devil or demon. But when we're communicating with the client or the patient, the client will use their own language. And I will often say that if you're using religious language, you might call this a devil or a demon. But we call them a DFE, dark force entity. So those who are sovereign, 25%, a minor DFE, 47%, severe DFEs, 13%. And they're the most difficult to deal with because they're the most powerful. Now we get to the meat of it, the discourse analysis, the dialogue. We can examine the discourse between the facilitator and the medium. I'm the facilitator, I'm the one asking the questions. The medium that I'm working with is in another place. I live in Folkestone. The mediums I work with are scattered all over the UK. Principally the one I use lives in Wiltshire. So we get on Skype, I connect with him and say, okay, Andrew, we've got a couple of cases to deal with today. And I'll say to him, do you have a spirit guide with you that's going to help? He's the third member of the team. And we work as a team, three of us. And he'll say, yes, I've got a spirit guide connected with me. I'll record the name of that spirit guide. And I will have a conversation with the guide. I will say to the guide, is this person sovereign? Yes or no? What does he have with him or she have with him? And I'll have a conversation with the guide through the medium.
Can you say it another time because I'm not sure how it works. You are sitting there in the left,
At my desk with a computer.
with this guy.
Yeah.
And then there is on the other side
A medium.
medium, and he has a guy,
A spirit helper.
A spirit guide.
A spirit guide.
okay, and he's a medium.
Yes.
So they work with the spirit helper and the medium, and
Yes.
Okay, and that is the three of you.
Yeah.
That's the three-person team. Yeah. Myself, the medium, and the spirit guide. Without the spirit guide, we can't do anything because you're relying on the knowledge or lack of knowledge of a medium, and that's not reliable. Okay. The discourse between the medium and the spirit guides we can look at. Discourse between the facilitator and the spirit guides, so all these different elements of conversation going on. The medium and the guides. And now this is really interesting when you discover earthbound spirits, because obviously these are different from dark force entities or demons. These are people who've died and haven't moved on, and their spirit remains earthbound. And they are as common as we are, believe it or not. We're surrounded by earthbound spirits all the time, and there are those people who are mediumistic and who have the gift of sight, clairvoyance, who can see them. So when we locate the earthbound spirits, then we can have a dialogue with them and say, and tell us your story, why are you attached to this person, what's the relationship? It's usually one of opportunistic attachment because they've died suddenly, they don't believe in an afterlife, they don't know where to go, they're confused, and they attach to a living person because they need comfort and support. So there's a sympathetic resonance children who've died suddenly will attach to a compassionate woman because of the need for mothering. So we often find women who have a compassionate nature will have a cluster of children gathered around her who've died and need moving on. I say moving on, we don't move them on, that's the wrong use of language. We invite relatives who've passed over before to come and collect them and show them the way. So this is what we call releasing the earthbounds. Dialogue between the facilitator and the remote patient. And this is the part that excites me most. Because dealing with the DFEs and dealing with the earthbounds is just another day at the office. It's routine, it's regular, it's just everyday business. You know, there's nothing dramatic about it at all. Where we have a difficult case where a person has been suffering from demonic possession for many, many years, they tend to have dissociated subpersonalities, which is a split-off part of the self. And this is the vulnerability that attracts the DFE in the first place. If a person has been emotionally or physically abused very early in their life as a child, in order to escape the trauma, and those of you who understand the mechanics of dissociative identity disorder will understand what I'm talking about. This is in the area of clinical psychology. Dissociative identity disorder used to be known as multiple personality. And it's created through trauma, and the split-off part splits off to escape the trauma. And it remains split off, no matter how old the person may become in their mature years. So once we've gone through the protocol of clearing the spiritual dimensions for earthbounds, interdimensional parasites, devils, demons, and there are so many different levels of existence beyond time and space that we can be affected or infected through any of these dimensions. Before we move on to the discourse with the associated subpersonalities, we have to make sure that the spirit is clean. And this is where healing the wounded spirit comes into its own. We have to make sure that the spiritual energy field, the etheric body of the person, is cleaned and free from any negative interference. The chakras are opened and operating properly, they're being repaired. The aura is being repaired, and once all that work is done, then we go into the psychological dimension. And the first question I ask is, does this person have any self-created thought forms, which are different from dissociated subpersonalities? A dissociated subperson is a split-off part of the self. A self-created thought form is created in addition to the self. And if it's negative, they can be dissolved. If it's positive, then the positive energy of that can be absorbed into the etheric field of the individual. When it's a dissociated subpersonality, we don't dissolve those because they're a part of the self. And in shamanic language, this is soul loss. So we recover the lost soul part, bring it back in, reintegrate it with the core self. So the person recovers and feels more complete. Now, when you've got a case where a person's been suffering lifelong, 30, 40 years, and we do get these cases, we clean the spirit, get rid of all the negative intrusions, then the fragmented self needs repairing. And that's where it can take time. And this is where the telepathic hypnosis technique comes in, when the therapist, the facilitator, is able to engage with the patient beyond time and space in a therapeutic relationship using hypnotic techniques. So in a nutshell, that's what we do. And this is the foundation of my understanding, where I gained my doctorate at Bangor. My research focused on the scientific methods used by 19th century researchers, William James and Pierre Janet and W.H. Myers. So that gave me an understanding of a scientific framework where these phenomena can be acknowledged as scientific and not just the results of creative imagination or superstition. It does have a scientific framework, and my book explains that. What I'm looking for now are institutions that can have a look at this research method and the data that I've produced. I call it first test because it's just a pilot study, and it's very primitive and very simple. Fortunately, I've been invited by Edward and Mary Kelly to go and visit them in the University of Virginia at the Department of Perceptual Studies, where they are engaged in studying these dialogues with mediums and so on. So hopefully we'll get a chance for some collaboration there. Just got to fix a date when I go and visit them. But the invitation is there. And I'm happy to say that all this research began here in Lampeter. Any questions? Yes. Do you have any questions?
One question.
This lady.
You started with the 6 or 7 questions
Yeah.
you asked yourself before you started the...
Yeah.
And the first was, one of the first, how do you see the difference between somebody who is possessed and somebody who has a hallucination or psychosis?
Yeah, there's a very, very simple answer to that question. We ask the spirits, is this person sovereign? Are they hearing? Is this it's a shortened version of asking a difficult question. Is this person sovereign, yes or no? This person is sovereign. They are the sole spiritual occupier of this physical form. So if there's no external spirit impacting on them, then what they're hearing is probably self-generated. And they may be experiencing delusions. But as I say, and as when Fabian introduced this panel, the focus is on studying the dialogue, studying the conversations that take place during the intervention session. And those that are of particular interest to me, with approval and help and a contribution, because it takes time, it costs money to do it. If the client family agree, we will have the sessions transcribed word for word for study and analysis. And we have several cases like that we've been working on, and several sessions that have been transcribed, sufficient enough now to provide the backbone of a book on the subject. It just needs putting together and putting into theoretical framework. But all the evidence is there to be analysed and studied. It's fascinating to read.
Yeah, I'm interested in the telepathy part. Is the telepathy initiated by the spirit guide or by yourself? Good question. What's the interconnection? Okay, good question. When I feel that there's an advantage to be gained from using this method, I will say to the medium, right, I don't want you to interact with the spirit guide now. The spirit guide takes a back seat. They observe, they keep protection in place to protect from DFEs, because we do come under attack from dark forces that try and prevent us doing the work. So the spirit guide is there in protection, and I'll say to the medium, I want you to connect now with the patient, with the subject. Now these people have a very, very regular tendency to find it easy
to engage in dialogue with spirit entities. It's part of the illness that they have. It's diagnosed as delusional or auditory hallucinations. They're talking to spirits all the time. So, and they find it easier to do than to talk to human beings. So we use that to our I use it to my advantage, and I'll say to the medium, I want you to approach this person and make your presence known to them very gently. And they will come up behind them and perhaps gently tap them on the shoulder or whisper something. And I'll say to the medium, is this person aware of your presence? They are now. And what's their response? Oh, surprised. What do they say? Where do you come from? Who are you? It's two people talking. So I'll say to the medium, tell the person why you're here. You're a friend of the family, and name a member of the family, and you're here to help. Is there anything I can do for you? So friendship and a trust, a rapport is established. Without that, you can do nothing. And this is a simple principle. This is a tenet of effective therapeutic relationship anyway. If the patient doesn't trust the therapist, you're going nowhere. So that's the first thing we do, is establish that trust. And we have cases where the patient will say, yeah, I've heard all that before. I'm being told by all these voices they're my friend, but then they, you know, tell me to kill myself and all this business. So then the media will say, well, I'm a friend of your Auntie Angie. And she's, oh, really? Yeah. And so you give family information that they relate to. So you build that trust. And the medium says, we're here to help. I've got a friend here with me that wants to talk to you. We just want to know what you want. I just want to be left alone. This person may be locked in their bedroom, on the computer, watching pornography or talking to spirits, all kinds of unhealthy behaviour. Just leave me alone, go away. And this is the problem the family are presented with. So how do you reach a person like that? You use this method. You go through the back door. So I establish a dialogue with the patient, and I enter into a therapeutic relationship with him or her using methods that are known to me to work as hypnotherapeutic suggestions. For example, a very recent case, a woman who'd been diagnosed with psychosis at the age of 19. She's now in her 60s. She's been prosecuted for poisoning her entire family and trying to kill them. She's been violent, abusive, dangerous, locked up several times. All her life she's suffered from these afflictions. We cleared all the negative stuff away from her, and there was an immediate transformation. And the first thing that a relative noticed was that the colour of her eyes changed from black to brown, which was her natural colour. When a person's possessed by a demonic entity, their eyes go black. And that's a first sign that goes along with the destructive behaviour. So, and one of the first signs that a person is free from negative entities is that their eye colour returns to normal. And their behaviour changes. But the damage is done to the psychological self. They have to learn to recover their sense of self, their own identity. If there are dissociated parts, they need to be negotiated with and reintegrated. And if there's resistance, that's a hard job. So you have to use this method to negotiate with the dissociated parts.
But you don't physiologically speak to the person. You speak through telepathically through the medium.
Once the connection is established, the medium steps aside then, and I'm then speaking to the patient.
You're speaking to the patient or the possessing deity or influencing?
The possessing deities are gone by now. You can't do anything all the time you've got dark force entities in the way, because they will interfere with the work. The spirit needs to be cleaned first, and clear and pure. Then you approach the fragmented personality. So you've done the spiritual work, now you're doing the psychological work.
And is the patient aware that you're doing this?
No, not consciously aware, no.
And are they consciously aware when the healing process is complete?
They become consciously aware. Let me give you an example. A recent case, a case of a woman in Germany, brought to our attention by a daughter. And she said her mother had been diagnosed with psychosis for 30 years. She'd been diagnosed when she was in her 40s. She's now 71 years old. Living in squalor, alcoholic, completely unmanageable, desperate. The family tried everything, psychiatrists and healers, nothing worked. And they asked us to intervene. So we did the first clearance, cleared away all the dark, negative stuff. And the daughter telephoned the mother and said, "Mum, how are you?" And the mother said, "Oh, I feel fine. It's great. The only trouble is I can't watch the television because voices keep coming out the television." So we went back in and had another look, and we surveyed the dwelling, her apartment where she was living, and we found an interdimensional portal that was using the television to deliver messages to her. So we asked the spirit guides to come in. They closed that portal and sealed it, so her dwelling was secure. And the following day, the mother invited her daughter and her son around to visit, which she never did, but she invited them round. So they went to see her, full of apprehension about how she was. And she'd stopped drinking, she'd cleaned the apartment, she'd had a bath, she'd dyed her hair, she cooked dinner and baked them a cake, and her eyes had turned from black to brown in 2 sessions. And for me, that is efficacy, that it works. Yes?
Thank you. It was a very brilliant presentation, and I'm not really from this field, so it was good to hear you speak, especially the fact that you took a very personal, the presentation was not like talking about them and theirs, but you took a very personal way of, with your experiences, examples, and things like that. My question to you is, the sessions seem to be very serious and intense, and I'm assuming that it has an impact on the facilitators themselves. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to hear something about that.
In the early days, working as a traditional hypnotherapist, and I was working with a doctor, a general practitioner, who would refer his patients to me with chronic illness. And when I first encountered what I now describe as such challenging cases, they are very, very dangerous in terms that you're describing. They can be physically threatening, they can be psychologically damaging, because some of these dark force entities, they are interdimensional species, they are highly intelligent, far more intelligent than we are, and they can run rings around us with their intellect. They can deceive us, lie, and they can implant messages. And this is the focus of my book. The central pillar of my book is the principle of telepathic hypnosis, which was scientifically validated in the 19th century and is now ignored by medical science, as is all the use of hypnosis in surgery is ignored by medical science now. But the work I do shows how effective it is. So when a hypnotherapist is presented with a patient who has an entity that knows how to cause psychological harm to a therapist, you get it. And you've got to take a sharp step backwards, and you feel the danger, you feel the threat. And when that was happening to me, I said to the doctor, I said, I've got to take time out. I need to learn how to deal with this. So I had to go away and learn these principles and learn all about it. And that is a story in itself. Yeah, dangerous. But now I'm fully protected. I have no fear. Fear is the key, actually. If you're afraid, it can be used against you. So to do this work, you have to be totally fearless.
Time for 1 or 2 more questions.
Yes.
Another 3-4 minutes.
Earlier on, you described negative influences. You used religious language of devils and demons. Is there any evidence that the use of such words, such descriptions, was more prevalent time past than it is today?
As a practitioner, and I've not researched this, but my guess is that it was more prevalent in times past. People, when we lived in a society that was more religiously minded, then the terminology devils and demons and angels was more keeping in with everyday language, but because we've become less religious, more secular, neutral language is more common. And I will often say to a spirit guide when we encounter a grade 3, and if I've got the time, which these days I don't often have, but if I've got the time to investigate further, I'll say to the spirit guide, interesting, I'm interested to know the origin and the nature of this species and its origin. And we have the answers come back, well, this was first recognised and documented in the hieroglyphs of ancient Egypt. And this was presented and worshipped as one of the ancient gods. But it's an interdimensional species that used the ignorance of people at that time to present themselves as a god, and they were worshipped, much to their detriment. And they still exist and they still influence people. And they've got names.
One last question.
Yeah, mine's an observation, really. I relate to what you say. I've sort of not going to use the word dabble, but people I've known have been more involved in this type of area than I have. I suppose my sort of idea of these is slightly different. There's a physical reality for me, and there's a kind of psychological or spiritual reality depending upon one's point of view. But somewhere between, there's a psychoid reality, which is somewhere between. And these entities, if you want to call them, because I think they will be experienced differently by different people, seem to inhabit that sort of dimension. But I would sort of step back from that and say that for some people, their reality is purely mundane. They have no sort of inkling of these other dimensions. Some people would experience what you describe as a metaphor rather than a reality. And another group of people would experience the metaphysical dimension that you've described. So I kind of think perhaps for these ideas to be more accessible to, because I do think they have real validity and are helpful in sort of sorting out the situations you describe. Perhaps sort of some other conceptual frameworks need to sort of come into play, because I can see some people really standing off these sorts of these ideas, finding them very difficult to kind of grasp, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, that is the difficulty in sharing this information with people who have different perceptual frameworks, the medical profession in particular. When a person presents to a doctor who's hearing voices, and in my notes I was going to go into greater detail, there's no real need for it because we all understand that when a person's hearing voices, they're very reluctant to go and see a doctor because they'll be labelled as mentally ill, or they're afraid of being called crazy by their relatives, so they very much keep it to themselves. So the way these phenomena are perceived by people around us, in the family, in our social circles and in the institutions, are serious inhibitory factors to understanding these principles. Speaking for myself, I choose to use what I can identify with William James's philosophy of pragmatism. Keep it simple, and does it work? Whatever language you use, keep it simple, does it work? And for me, and for my patients, it does.
Okay.
Thank you for listening.
I think that was quite brilliant. It's a very, very hard act to follow.
So there, witnessed a couple of sessions, seen how long it takes in comparison with traditional medical methods and therapies. We're treating people who've been suffering their entire lives from abuse and neglect and all kinds of emotional and physical trauma. And what we're trying to do is to heal the sick in the best, most efficient way possible, and this is the method we're using.